Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a highly energizing day. Today, we're going to talk not only about biogas, but spark ideas, forge connections, and most importantly, learn from each other. This workshop brings together brilliant minds from policymaking, science, engineering, and community development, all with a shared commitment to foster and promote sustainable development in Armenia. Whether you are here to share your expertise, ask bold questions, this room is the right one for you, and we are excited for what we will learn together. Before we dive in, I think I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Nona Babayan. I have been coordinating the biogas study. So before we dive in, let me quickly go over the program for today. So, we'll begin in just a moment with welcome remarks and the introduction to biogas study by none other than Ellen Amirkhanyan, Director of ＨԱՀ Յակոբեան Center for the Environment. Then we will shift to the main presentation by Morten Gillenborg, who is the CEO of Renew Energy, the Danish engineering consultancy, which has a vast experience in this field. And we're honored to have Morten Gillenborg here with us. At 11:30, we'll open the floor for Q&A session, so prepare your questions. I know you're going to ask challenging and bold questions. So at 12, we'll break for lunch. The lunch will be just outside, so enjoy some food, make connections, because this is also part of the energy for today. And then the most important part are the breakout sessions. We will introduce later in more detail what the breakout sessions are and where they are going to be, because they're not going to be in the Manukyan Hall. But let me quickly also go over the breakout session for today. So the first session, legislative and regulatory reforms in the biogas sector, which will be facilitated by Harutun Albedian. You see the room number. So if you are a policy person, then this room is definitely for you. The next session, financing pathways for the biogas sector. By the way, this is the only session where we will have simultaneous translation. So this will be in Agan Gallery, facilitated by Neri Minasyan. So if you're thinking numbers, investments, scaling up, that this section and session is definitely for you. And the last session, facilitated by none other than myself, Nona Babayan. You see the room number. So if you are interested in learning more about infrastructure and technologies that bring to life the biogas plants, that definitely this session is for you. And then we will wrap up and come here back to the Manukyan Hall for the wrap up. This will be a platform to learn about the key findings from other two sessions. So make sure you come back after the breakout sessions here back to the Manukyan Hall. And then finally, the last 30 minutes, we will have concluding remarks, reflect on what we have learned today, and then how we'll move forward, most importantly, together. So now to kick off our day officially, it's my honor to introduce someone who doesn't really need an introduction in this space. It's Ellen Amirkhanyan, the director of ＨԱՀ Յակոբեան Center for the Environment. And please join me welcoming Ellen to the stage for opening remarks and introduction to biogas study. Thank you.
Thank you, Nona. Thank you, Nona, for forcing people to applaud for me. I'm Alan Amirkhanyan. I'm the director of the ＨԱՀ Յակոբեան Center for the Environment. Welcome to AUA. This is a very important day, not only because we're going to discuss biogas and hopefully discuss it in a way that sees some pathways to the future, finding ways in which biogas can be viably integrated into the Armenian economy, if it is possible to do that. But it's also important because today is Earth Day, right? So April 22nd is Earth Day, and it's also relevant to the topic of biogas, because this year's theme is around energy, powering our planet, and just a few facts as global citizens we should know about the planet and our especially food production, what it's doing to the planet, I think it's upon us to really, incumbent on us to really understand the impacts we're having. So livestock contributes to 2/3 of the agriculture's greenhouse gases and 80% of the methane emissions. So this is big, big, big. 1/3 of food is wasted globally. So not only we're having a embedded methane being used, but also the methane that afterwards, as the biomass degrades, being emitted. So there's a double kind of impact it's having. Methane as a greenhouse gas, as you may all know, is significantly more impactful as a greenhouse gas. And Earth Days, as I mentioned, our power, our planet is the theme, and we should start thinking about how what we call waste is actually a resource, and think in those terms. So whenever we're thinking of, biomass waste, we need to recognize that there is nutrient and energy value in there. Can we viably harness that? That's the basic question we need to ask ourselves. And biogas, of course, offers a solution. But as I would mention later, this is not that's not the only thing we get. Energy is not the only thing we get from biomass when we harness it in the way that the biogas technologies do. This program, pre-feasibility study, came out of a policy dialogue process that we had at the AUA Յակոբեան Center and the AUA Entrepreneurship Product Innovation Center, a joint initiative we have, AUA Energy for Climate. And we had convened a lot of discussions around various energy topics. And this idea of doing a study on biogas came out of that process. We had consultations with various experts, we had consultations with public officials, and there was an interest to do a study like this. And this study is a little bit different than what has been done in the past, and I'll show you how we've done several biogas projects in the past, but this one is looking at the system as a whole, right? So we're hoping that this will give us insights that are a little bit more valuable in terms of rolling out at a larger scale the potential of biogas. And then, as the conversations took on, my friend and the director of the AUA EPIC, Michael Kuchakyan, contacted the Danish embassy in Tbilisi, and they agreed to host a series of talks, or help us organize a series of talks on biogas with Danish companies. The other important piece in all of this was that we had an ongoing project, a program called Waste Policy Armenia. And Waste Policy Armenia wasn't exactly looking at biomass and bio-waste, but we explored this with our project officers in SIDA, and this was Swedish-funded project, and we're grateful, of course, to Sweden for funding both the Waste Policy Armenia and also within it the biogas feasibility study. And they agreed, and they extended some financing to be able to do this study. And then an open bidding process went on, and Renew Energy was selected as the winner of the bidding. It was a very competitive process, actually, very long competitive process. So some of the basic facts that got us motivated to think about why biogas should be even considered in Armenia. We have about 500,000 heads of cattle. That's about the same size as many European countries. Pigs, 190,000. Poultry, 4.5 million. Massive amounts of crop residues that we burn in the fields. Large amounts of food waste. Some of our studies show 60% of the household waste is kitchen waste. Right? So poor management of this bio waste has negative environmental consequences. We know that also. And at the same time, we keep thinking of these things as waste, which really has, should be, we kind of, as I mentioned earlier, we have to switch our way of thinking about this. This is a resource that has energy and nutrient value. Can we harness this effectively? Are we missing an opportunity? That was a question we asked, right? So, so we thought, some of the benefits that from harvesting the biogas we could get, and that could be explored further, is certainly environmental management. We know that preventing runoffs from agricultural, animal waste and burning of the fields, etc., has environmental damage. And especially in the water bodies, nutrient overloading, nitrogen phosphorus overloading is a problem, which in Lake Sevan we see as a consequence of that. We see the eutrophication, the algal blooms. Energy security and transition to renewables is a concern for a country like Armenia. So locally produced sources of energy can be used to generate heat, power, and even transport. We are in a very interesting situation in Armenia where 70% of our transport is run by natural gas. So there's a very unique opportunity to kind of see that as also an end user. And our initial estimates were that we can replace up to 10% of the natural annual gas imports from Armenia. So we'll see if that's initial estimates were kind of on the ball or accurate. There's also the very important part of nutrient recovery. Not only we harvest energy from biowaste, but we also recover valuable nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus and use it as a source of organic fertilizer, right? So we process it a little bit. What is left behind after the gas is there's a liquid and a solid component. Both of those can be turned into very valuable organic fertilizer. And this can help us with better soil management. We know in Armenia we have a soil degradation problem. We have a huge problem with soil quality. And from pasture lands to farmlands to forested areas, especially if we're doing new afforestation projects or reforestation projects or forest land restoration, we're going to need nutrients to ensure that the efforts are. So this material can also be used that because vast volumes of these will be generated. So there's a place that we can put this. In fact, it should be public policy that this should be used to improve soil quality in the country. And of course, reducing risk of wildfires, because we know some of the wildfires in forested areas are caused by communities close by when they burn their crop residues. And that also leads to negative consequences. And this, by integrating the crop residues into this biogas production, which, as we have learned, we have to actually, it's an important component of biogas production, then we also reduce the risk of wildfires and the consequences of that for our forests and other ecosystems. Climate mitigation will help Armenia with reducing its greenhouse gas emissions, our nationally determined contributions. This will be a contribution to that, and it should be a significant contribution to that. And tapping into carbon markets is another revenue stream that we should not underestimate. So we will be able to use some of these opportunities to really sell the carbon credits in the carbon markets. And then business development, job creation opportunity shouldn't be underestimated. These operations have lots of logistics and require know-how. Business sector is really best suited to address this. This is not a public sector thing. So it's very important to get the private sector also involved and have a very solid business logic at the base of it. We know that these attempts have been made in Armenia over the past 2 decades. From the most famous probably is the Lusaker biogas plant, right? And Nubarashen landfill is another one that harvests the biogas. And there's, the Basen, the Azatan, and then these 6 of these are also initiatives that were done in more recent years. I think, overall the impression and the public perception of these is that they have not been successful. And why? Well, many different reasons. Part of it is because the business wasn't a viable business. The business itself went bankrupt, couldn't run the operation, so it wasn't anything about the technology. Some of it was that the technology itself was installed poorly, so it had suboptimal output. Some of it, and also we have to recognize there isn't much of a know-how in the country. This is the challenge with biogas, because it's so commonsensical. It's a 4,000-year-old technology, okay? So there's nothing new about biogas, except you can improve the yields and productivity with knowledge and science, but it makes very much sense, right? Because you have biological matter that degrades. In the process, methane is emitted. When you say this to everyone understands this, oh, I can do that. But when it comes to doing it, actually, they fail, right? Because there's a lot of engineering know-how that's required. There's a lot of, if you're talking about doing it at scale, you can always do it at a small home scale, that's fine. But then the logic of the economic logic is very important to have there. So I think, most of these attempts were considered unsuccessful. Will the picture change if we have better regulatory environment, better business models, understand the business logic a little bit better when we're initiating this, and think of solutions at the system level and not project level or individual? Think of it as country level. We have this 500,000 cows and 200,000 pigs and 4.5 million chickens are not in one place. They're around the country. So if we think of it as on a system level, what do we get? So with that, I welcome Morten Gillenborg to give us his insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I think this was a perfect introduction to where we are, and also to the findings that we have made during the production of this study. And I very much look forward to the discussion with the people with you in this room, and hopefully cover some topics that we have not uncovered yet, and have a good debate about that. Yeah, so let me just get the technology working here. Do I need to do something? Sorry, there we go. Yep. I have quite a bit of time to talk to you. So my name is Morten. I run Renew Energy, and I have about 25 years of experience within the energy sector as a whole. And a little more than a decade ago, I decided to throw myself upon biogas and anaerobic digestion, because at that time a massive rollout in Denmark, where I'm from, was underway. Today we're going to talk a bit, I'll go briefly through who we are as a company, focusing then on biomethane a little bit. Probably it's very common to a lot of you guys, so bear with me. A little bit of comparison between Armenia and Denmark, because there are some interesting similarities and also some differences that are important to hold on to. Then onto the study, well, we'll go through what we've found and what we have been proposing, and then on to next steps and a Q&A session afterwards. First of all, Renew Energy, just briefly, we're a family-owned business. We're headquartered out of Denmark, and we work, I won't say in all of the world, but we do have most of our focus outside of our country, trying to export the learnings we've had from within our country, but also utilizing various technologies and insights that are actually not usable in Denmark, because Denmark also has its own peculiarities or special way of doing things. We have some representation across the world, a little bit in the US and South Korea, as well as South Africa, of all places. We are a company that has employees that have worked within this field for more than 3 decades, with a variety of backgrounds. And there's a lot of focus on chemistry, biology, because underneath, as was mentioned, this is not new. Nature's been doing this for millions of years. I mean, the natural gas we pull up from underground is essentially biogas, just very old. We have some marine engineering as well, because there is some similarities to some of the issues you have when you run a ship as to when you run an anaerobic digestion process. We focus on various different design and engineering work around the facilities, focusing a lot, I don't know if the pointer works this far, but on the initial basic engineering phases, the detailed engineering, getting that into place, because that is the foundation. And what we see across the world is that if you make mistakes in this early onset, then that will haunt you forever and ever. We come from a society where, and I think this is a similarity to Armenia in some ways, where we do not have an abundance of everything. If you go to the US, for instance, that's a different story. For instance, on reducing the energy consumption at any production levels. That is something we're very focused on, keeping these facilities as efficient as possible, integrating various technologies. In Denmark, just to say where we come from, we have built up a natural gas system since the late 70s and early 80s, so that about 15 years ago, we had a massive consumption of natural gas. We produced it all ourselves from the North Sea, and we sold whatever was in excess to other countries around us. About 10 years ago, we decided that it was time for a change because, well, climate was knocking on the door, is one thing. Another thing was that we are running out of natural gas. So if we want to supply ourselves, what do we do? What we've done is we've reduced natural gas consumption quite a bit. We'll get to the numbers later, but at the same time, we've also increased very briefly, or very quickly, I think, the biogas and biomethane production into the grid, so that the last couple of years we've been at about 40% of our consumption of gas has actually been bioenergy based. It's produced at large-scale facilities, injected into the grid, and then consumed as any other gas would from the gas system. Yeah. This I nicked from the TSO in Denmark, the transmission system operator. And the reason I did that is not only due to laziness, it's also due to laziness, but it's also to stress that this whole integration of energy, of sustainable energy into the grid is not something that grassroots organizations work with. This is the state, this is the TSO. And they are telling this story because it's important to them as well to have sustainable energies in the grid, to have domestic productions in the grid. And this is, of course, relevant for the gas system as this, but it also goes for the electricity system. I'm repeating here a lot of the messages Alan already mentioned, but we try to focus a lot on waste, whether it be agricultural waste, food waste, whatever. We have actively diverted away from what is called energy crops, that is crops grown directly for the use in anaerobic digestion. Here might be a difference to Armenia, where you have an opportunity to actually do something make something for the AD without it having as negative impacts as it would in a country like ours, in a region like ours, because you have lands that are not utilized as much. Food waste, very much the same thing. Just when you think of this, when I mention this, I want to stress that when I mention food waste later on in the presentation, it's not only the kitchen waste. That is a part of it, but we also focus on industrial byproducts, the leftovers from factories, slaughterhouse waste, and consider this a food waste, because it is essentially something that was in the chain of food production, and not to confuse too much. I think the important point here is also about transforming the system on how it handles this waste, because right now, and as a comparison to Denmark, we have 2% that ends up in landfill of all of our waste. Everything else ends somewhere else. It's because A, we like to burn stuff, so we have a lot of incineration, a little bit of pyromaniacs, you might say. But we have now, over the last, let's say, 10 years, taken out the food waste part, so that doesn't end up in the incineration facilities anymore. Methane and biomethane. This is a little bit cartoonish, so forgive the simplicity of it, but the point of it is that when we design and when we work with anaerobic digestion, I think it's important to recognize that most of what we put into these digesters is actually just something we put in there because we need to, in order to facilitate the degradation process, the digestion efficiently. When we put in 100% of biomass, about 10% of that ends up as biogas. And of that biogas, about 6 percentage points is methane, and 4 is CO2. That's roughly the numbers we're working with. The rest is, in the most simplistic scenario, a cost to handle. So we have to try to work with that, and luckily we are seeing markets move. And maybe a final point is that when you have the methane down here being 6% of the whole, if you convert it to electricity, about 4 percentage points are lost. So you're left with closer to 2.5 as electricity. The rest is heat or lost in the production of the electricity. So the value chains. Generically speaking, we see across the world a lot of value chains attached to the sourcing of the feedstock. It can be in both directions. It can be costs. It can be revenues. But when it comes to the waste, in most places, what we do see is we see some sort of recognition that while waste is, you can say, a resource, it's also something that unfortunately costs more than the resource value itself. That's how it is in most places. Denmark is actually transitioning away from that, but that is a particular case. Oh, would you like me to use that one instead? No? Okay. Sorry, let me just get back on track. Yes, and in terms of, in an Armenian context, we do not see that yet, that we don't have any costs associated with getting rid of your waste. Of course, you have then afterwards costs and revenues associated with producing the power, the gas itself, in many places CO2, and in more and more places also value attributed to the solid fertilizer that you can have, or even the liquid fertilizer. In some places we install systems where you collect, we make sort of nutrient factories out of these digestion facilities. It's not what we think should be first in line here in Armenia, but just to say that there are ways of adapting these systems into various infrastructural setups. And then, as Alan also mentioned, the carbon credits are becoming a more and more important pathway to finding revenue, because biogas is a little particular, and in many places we see it compared to wind, to solar, and I think it's important to stress that it is very, very different. Yes, they both have the potential of producing electricity, but that is more or less the only thing they have in common. Biogas taps into a lot of different value streams in society, which is also what I'm trying to implicate here, and produces a lot more. It produces gas, which is storable, which is durable, which can be used when you need it. You can choose to produce electricity from such gas. It also produces the CO2 that you can collect, that you can use, that you can store, that you can put away, sort of tapping out, using Mother Nature to collect the CO2 and then using technology to take away the residues, in this case the CO2. And then very importantly, as Alan mentioned, it uses and collects the nutrients that are otherwise lost. It was actually one of the key driver for the first installations that we had for large-scale anaerobic digesters in Denmark. I have an example of it later on. Was farmers that came together desiring to have a better soil fertilizer, that they could optimize their yield from their farms if they jointly produced biogas as a byproduct to get to the better digested after the digestion process. This was back in, this is roughly 30 years ago. It was, the facility I have in mind was inaugurated in 1996 and has been expanded many times since, but with the same farmers or their families still engaged with it. This is an example of a nutrient recovery solution, but it can be, you can sort of cherry pick a little in whatever system fits or which technologies fits, and basically it all circulates around the digestion. You gather your feedstock, you sort out any impurities, you digest it, and then you produce your biomethane and your gas, your biogas, upgrading it to grid, using it in a CHP, if that's what's the viable solution for you, and then potentially splitting it in a liquid and a solid stream. You can then do a lot more if you want. If water is a scarce resource, we see that in some places. So these can, in fact, become nutrient factories. CO2. This is another figure that I stole from someone, in this case the EIA. Sorry, the IEA, where you can argue from a biochemical perspective, CO2 is sort of the last resort. And so why would we take that and try to put energy back into it, since Mother Nature basically has said nothing is left here, I'm done with it. The reason to do it is that this is, as I mentioned before, using biomethane and then, or using biogas anaerobic digestion to produce, or you could say free up the CO2 that is in circulation already, is basically using Mother Nature to collect the CO2, and then you can do with it what you want. In some places we see CCS becoming viable. In some places we actually utilize it. If you buy a beer or a soda in Denmark, there is a pretty high likelihood that the CO2 in there comes from an anaerobic digester. And you can't taste it, just to make sure. But it's not a story, and this actually comes back to the Achilles heel of biogas and anaerobic digestion. It's not something that is marketed heavily, that this is what we do. It is how it is. But it is because there is a storyline around it that is difficult to communicate. But essentially, if you think about it, the CO2 in a beer has always come from a biological degradation. That's always been the case. So it's just been the case that that biology had been on the breweries, and now it's somewhere else. But the CO2 is the CO2. What I'm aiming at here is trying to underline that when we do designs, and that's what we've done in this case also, implementing it in different regions and countries, we have to take into account a lot of differences or a lot of, you could say, specialities of any area. Biogas is, if you look aside the fact that it's, the digestion itself, a biogas facility, a modern industrialized or larger biogas facility is a lot about logistics. It's a lot about getting the feedstock in, getting the digestate away, storing it, using both that and the gas when you need it, and not necessarily all the time. And that boils down to something around infrastructure. What's available in terms of grids, what's available in terms of roads, what about farm sizes, and so on. There's local requirements, laws and regulations. Armenia is leaning towards a lot of European regulation, implementing that, but things takes time. And you might also argue that even well within the borders of the EU itself, there is massive differences from country to country that has to be taken into account. Then there's the local value chains, and I think that's one that we've spent during this study a lot of time elaborating on, diving into, because especially in the rural communities of Armenia, there are some you could say not so typical local practices that we need to work with in order to be able to make a larger rollout. And of course there is the culture and history. Denmark has, if you at least go after the Viking era, always been an agricultural country. And we're flat like a pancake, contrary to here. 96% of our land is utilized in some way or another, and the rest are beaches. So there are some big differences in that aspect, but also culturally. At least since I'll say the 50s in Denmark, we've seen a lot of industrialization within farming. We've seen larger and larger farms, and that has not so much been the case here. We see it starting a little bit. We see examples of it, but there's still a transition to happen. I have brought a few examples of some facilities that we have designed and built or assisted in building, as the case may be, around the world. This is a fairly small but well-running facility that runs off of a variety of feedstock from food production and similar. It's in Poland. It's about 1.6 megawatts of power. Was installed a little more than 10 years ago, and unfortunately, I spoke to the owner last year on a trip to Poland, and he says it's still running at 98% capacity. So that's a little annoying. They keep on running. This one is a food waste facility, 400 tons a day in New Jersey. Also power. We'll see. I have a little hope that it will be transformed. And just to make sure that there's no misunderstanding, these tanks are not rusty. That's by design that they have that color to match the bricks in the building. It was a so-called brownfield where we had to squeeze in a facility in existing buildings. This is another one that works off of a byproduct of local industries. It's fairly big. It's more than 15 megawatts of power, utilizing more or less only local feedstocks from the factories and then a little bit of manures to stabilize the process. It was the first of its kind when it was built in Lithuania. And then this is the one that I mentioned where the farmers actually came together in the mid-90s. Today, it's 1,000 tons of various feedstocks, mostly manures and slurries from animal produce, and then also food waste residues. But it started out as about 1/3 of that 25 years ago, and then it's been expanded in steps over the years as more and more feedstock became available and as farms grew bigger. It was 35 farmers in the beginning. It's still roughly 35 farmers. Ownership has changed since that, because then nowadays this has become big business in the Nordics at least. And today that facility is no longer only owned by farmers. Whether that's a good thing or not, we'll see. But for sure, some farmers hopefully cashed in on that one. Now, I have a few slides on some parallels and also some of the differences that I think are notable when we compare Denmark and Armenia. In terms of population, we're not that different. Both fairly small countries. Also in terms of size, Denmark is maybe a little bit larger. But in terms of geography, and I didn't mention this so much, we're very, very different. You're a mountainous country. We are a country by the ocean. I think by coastline, we have the most coastline of any country compared to our size. And anywhere in Denmark, there's no further than 30, 35 kilometers to the ocean. That's the furthest you can get away, because then you'll hit ocean on the other side of wherever you are. The gas grid, and this actually not just goes for the gas grid, this goes for all of our transmission systems, except one, and that's the phone lines. They're privately held, and we realized that was a big mistake. But everything else is state-owned. It goes for power grids, it goes for gas grids, and that I think is a big difference actually. Because it easily allows for long-term investments into the grid. Whereas in Armenia, these are to a large extent privately owned. When it comes to biomethane, we introduced laws around this for the grid about 12 years ago. Up until then, we already had a lot of biogas production, but no biomethane. And over the years, we've adopted the regulation to fit, because there are some costs associated with suddenly changing, you can say, how the gas gets into the grid. And the same would be in Armenia. We've been used to gas coming from the North Sea, basically one point of entry. So we had a very lazy gas grid because it came in at high pressure, and then we simply just used that pressure throughout the grid. And now it goes the other way. So initially we start to tap into low pressure grids, and then of course what happens if you produce more than you need in that local grid? Then you need to compress it to higher levels. However, we now have regulation in place where the grid has to accept. It has to accept the biogas or biomethane into the grid. No questions asked. There can be a question of the price, which they then have to calculate what will be the cost of connecting. But other costs associated with what we call grid enforcements are actually held by the grid itself, and thus by the average consumer in the country. Here, regulation still has to be made around this. So at this point, it would require some negotiation and some acceptance from the grid. In terms of consumption, we used to consume, and we're only talking 15 years ago, close to 5 billion cubic meters per year. That has come down dramatically. We had little help a few years ago when the war in Ukraine broke out, and the prices spiked. And that really made people and also factories look elsewhere for anything that could be replaced with another source. Has been. But so the trend has been downwards. For Armenia, it's opposite. Gas consumption has been increasing over the years. We have a roadmap in Denmark for biomethane in the grid, and the target is 100% in 2030. That's in 5 years from now. Will we make it? We'll see. We'll definitely try. We'll get there. If we don't make 100, then we'll maybe make 80. But the target is set. For Armenia, this yet has to be defined, politically and policy-wise. There's also social transition, a social difference, I think is important to stress. We have a high degree of trust between our citizens and the government, and it is fundamentally a trust-based society. I think here it requires a bit more enhancement and also some change in habits when it comes to that. But when we do compare on agricultural land in relative terms to the total land, Armenia and Denmark are not that different. So there are definitely differences, but also similarities. Coming back to the animal populations, also mentioned, Denmark is, I don't know how to put this nicely, Denmark is a country full of shit. We have a lot of animal production. We have as many cows as you have cattle here. We have a pig population of more than twice our people population. If you add the people population to the pigs, then I mean that's also possible. And then on the poultry side, we also produce a lot of eggs and a lot of, I mean, we slaughter about 120 million chickens a year, and we don't always eat chicken, so a lot of it's exported. I mean, let me put it that way, when it comes to eggs, even in these times, and I won't bring in big politics or anything, but I just think it's a little funny that at the same time that we're talking tariffs and trade wars and all that, we've actually had a reach out from the American central government to supply them with eggs, because they need that more than we do. So we have a lot of animal population and hence also a lot of animal waste. So that's also a natural starter for the biogas production, and why we have regulation that encourages the use of animal waste in the biogas production. But I think it's important to stress that biogas does not have to be animal waste based. It can be based on a variety of other sources, other agricultural byproducts. When it comes to farming, there's a lot of larger farms. I would argue that the typical Danish farm probably has somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 cows, where what we've come to learn is that in the rural areas, in Armenia, it's 3 to 5. So that's a difference. So another thing is, and there's of course a cultural and historical difference. We've always come together in what we call cooperatives, working together to achieve a higher goal. And the farmers have done this a lot. Our biggest, and I'm not aware if they're present here, but there's a company called Arla, which produces milk and cheeses and so on. That's a cooperative. It's, I don't know, 15,000 farmers come together. The same with a company called Danish Crown, which is a slaughter business. They produce meat, pigs especially. That's also cooperative. But it started out as smaller cooperatives in little villages, where a village came together, made a cooperative, maybe produced their own milk, who knows, or just traded jointly. And that's basically the history of it. When it comes to the animal manure, this has become a valuable product or a valuable feedstock for the AD. Strangely enough, not so much because it by itself produces a lot of gas, because it doesn't. There is some gas in it, but it's certainly not the most potent feedstock. But because of the methane emissions, because of the CO2 emissions that you avoid when you digest it in a controlled environment, this has become valuable in a European context, because it taps into the renewable energy directives, and that recognizes that when you digest this, you avoid a lot of emissions. And that has value in the European market. And that is something that I think we should target and provides with a pathway of, for financing, just to say it how it is. Then there are some other very, very physical differences or comparisons on how big is a truck, what you do with food waste. We have in Denmark an industry now that collects and competes to get the food waste from the households. It is in bags, plastic bags as it is, separately source collected and then treated and provided for sale to the biogas facilities. But this has been a long transition. Not that long though, but it's been built over 10 years, I would say. If you go back, let's say 10 years, in Denmark you would pay to get rid of food waste. Now you actually get a little bit paid to supply your food waste to one of these producers. Fertilizers, and let me just stress that when it says organic fertilizers here, it's not meant in a commercially organic way. It's meant as a biological organic. I just want to stress that. It's not trying to tap into something that is certified organic or anything. That would require more control of the feedstock, I would say. But the point about this is that utilizing the fertilizers is a driver for the anaerobic digestion. Not the only one, but it's one of them, and it's replaced a lot of the chemical fertilizers. We're still using chemical fertilizers also in Denmark, but to a smaller degree because of the anaerobic digesters. And then maybe a last and important point on the landfilling. I already mentioned that we don't landfill very much anymore for a variety of reasons. But these are government-regulated entities. And here what we see is that it's largely unregulated. And that is definitely one thing that we should focus on. On the natural gas prices, the blue curve here, this is trying to compare what is sort of the situation in Armenia versus what is it we see elsewhere in Europe. The blue is the TTF, the tidal transfer price in the Netherlands, which is sort of indicative of European gas pricing. The red one we have is the typical Armenian natural gas price. And the price that we are working with, have proposed, is the 4.5 cents per kilowatt, bright blue, as a baseline value for the gas that could be injected in the Armenian grid. I think this is important to mention because you can argue there's nothing better for fossil oil sales than a low fossil price. There's nothing worse for green transition at the same time. And so you can argue that there is a you can say a camel to be swallowed in this respect, that in order to make something that is close to commercially viable, a biogas facility will need some sort of help on the prices. Same goes for the tariffs on power. This is again trying to compare pricing in Europe on electricity to pricing of electricity in Armenia. So the red dotted line at the bottom, that's the typical price we would say in Armenia as a producer price, 4 cents. Whereas the wind, as we understand, gets around 10 cents. And that is the same we would propose for the biogas as a minimum. Now, finally on to the study itself. We already talked a little bit about it, or I talked a little bit about it. some of the underlying feedstock potential. So what we have identified is a little more than 7 million tons of potential feedstock in Armenia. Most from animal manures, but also important feedstock from other sources. Yeah, so I'm not sure that this one works, but what I want to stress is that while the numbers, of course, look very dominant on the animal waste side, there's two things to bear in mind. One, a lot of that animal manure is in rural areas with small farms. The second one is that what we call mixed food waste and residential food waste had, I would say, somewhere between, and you actually have it below, 5 to 10 times more biomethane potential for each ton than the animal manures. So the volumes itself say one thing, but also if you look at straw, even though it's a considerably smaller volume in tonnage, it has an important potential because of a larger yield. What we found was that there is a gross potential of about 250 million cubic meters per year in Armenia. About half of it is from animal manure, about a quarter from straw, and then short of 20% from food wastes. Then a little bit from the greenhouses, but fortunately these greenhouses are relatively efficient, so while there is waste, the biogas potential from it is limited. A lot of the tonnage comes from the stems of plants and so on, and that does not have much of a gas yield. We did a regional and also intra-regional analysis across the country, and obviously the potentials are correlated to where you have animal production, to where people live, and so on. Highest yields to the north and to the east, but also centrally in the more central regions are found some reasonable potentials. We work with a cluster term, an idea of having an area within which different suppliers can supply to one or more facilities. And we've tried to pinpoint, and the report dives more into the specifics of it, where these could be. Some of the things that we consider in this case are the logistics, because as I mentioned earlier, logistics are very, very important. Especially the more industrialized these gets, the more feedstock has to be transported from a distance, the more these become little hubs of feedstock and digestate. Then we also looked at synergies to other factories, facilities, etc. If there were CO2 consumers, and that is one thing where greenhouses can definitely hold a potential for siting, is on the CO2. In many places, greenhouses will produce CO2 in their so-called CO2 generator, which is typically some sort of an engine that burns natural gas, because then the plants grow faster, and the biogas facilities can supply this. Of course, we also looked at connectivity in terms of electricity grids, gas grid, etc., and potential heating possibilities. All in all, we identified during the course just short of 400 different potential sites. Some are, you can say, more likely to be good than others, but within each region, we did find relevant sites for each of the potential clusters that we propose, and have identified up to about 20 potential clusters across Armenia. The one in Yerevan, it's mentioned here, 0/1, is because it's a little particular, that one. It might not be located within the city of Yerevan itself, but would be based on Yerevani feedstocks from households, etc. And would be more or less solely food waste based. Now, one of the challenges, one of the big challenges in terms of large-scale rollout is that when we dive into the distribution of the animal waste and split it on what we call household farms, that is smaller farms, and then more industrialized farms, then it turns out that close to 95% of that feedstock stems from household farms. I do think that we might be missing, I'm hoping that we're missing a little bit of potential here, because we have seen with our, we have visited sites with large-scale productions. We've seen sites with farmers come together where you had 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 cows in one area. So, and it's not completely reflected in the statistics here. But in any case, there is, no matter how much we try to tweak it, there is a challenge in finding out, and that's one of the takeaways I hope to get from the breakout sessions later today, is some ideas on how to navigate that. We proposed we proposed 3 models. One is a farm-based biogas system where basically all feedstock comes from farms, one or more farms. That is not something from a digestion perspective we really consider. It doesn't, I mean, from the digestion of animal wastes, it doesn't really matter if it comes from one farm or several farms. But with a targeted production of a little more than 2 million cubic meters of methane per year. And the reason for that is that to do these installations commercially viable, we suggest to go at least for 1 megawatt of power production if you're targeting electricity. And that is what that size does. There's an efficiency in these CHPs, combined heat and power engines, of just above 40%. So when you burn a cubic meter of gas or biogas, you get a little more than 40% as electricity, a little more than 40% as heat, and the rest is lost in the combustion. If you do such a combustion in large turbines, and that's also something we've looked at, you do get a higher efficiency. You get about 60% of efficiency, but those would normally run on natural gas and not a biogas. So there's a trade-off there. Biogas model 2 is food waste based and targets upgrading of the gas to biomethane, whether it be to grid or to transportation, and targets 5 million cubes of methane per year. The last one, and the one that is most reflective of, you can say, the modern day installations that you have in Northern Europe, whereas biogas model 2 in terms of size is more reflective of where of what was installed, let's say 10 years ago, targets 10 million cubes per year. And I have some key numbers on them. In terms of sizing per day, these are wet volumes. In terms of biogas productions, and in terms of digested and CO2 volumes. If you look at the gross energy production, the second to last, and compare it to the last one, there is for model 1, it goes from just short of 22 to 13, and that's because of the electricity and the efficiency on it. This is a layout of a Model 1 facility. It contains, in this case, a lot of options that we have not included in the CapEx, that we have tried to say this can wait as a sort of a phase 2 on these facilities. But once they are completed, we would foresee something like this. Reception of feedstock indoors, which we consider optional. This is in the building in the middle, you can say. Some storage tanks going in and going out of the facility. And then, of course, the digestion and the CHP. Most of these, or many of these elements that you see here, we do consider optional. So only the ones with black text are the ones that we consider is a must-have on day one. The rest is a little up to, you can say, the local area that you're in. What kind of feedstock are you handling? What kind of emission handling in terms of odors, etc., are acceptable in that area? Yeah, the image is a little bit distorted. It looks a little different here on my screen. Yeah, so that can be the reason for the buildings look very tall on this one. They are not. For Model 2 is actually simpler, because that one is food waste based only. So the idea here is that somewhere food waste is produced. It could be at factories, or it could be at a pulping station that we also have some numbers on in the report. And that feedstock is then transported to the biogas facility. And for that reason, it's a little bit simpler than the potential farm scale. But in terms of size, it's similar in terms of footprint. And then a Model 3 where we sort of take a little bit from, not a little bit, we take, you can say this reflects 2 farm scale facilities and 1 food waste based put into one in what we call a co-digestion facility. So it entails more pre-treatment, it entails more digestion, and of course has upgrading to grid. On the numbers, we've done, in order to run numbers like this, and of course we've done a lot of sparring with both local experts and the AUA itself on getting to these numbers. We do take a lot of assumptions. One is on the quality of what is received. That is a parameter that is, we have made some assumptions on what we get and so on. We would always suggest that when you dive into a concrete example of this is where we want to build, this is the feedstock, you do tests, you do analysis, you speak to the suppliers to increase the quality of what you receive. In the assumptions here, we have assumed no change over the lifetime. We have assumed no tip fees for the waste. We have assumed that the facility covers transportation back and forth, water at a cost, fairly low cost. Straw is not a typical commodity in Armenia. It's not traded a lot. What we have assumed here is, well, actually, since we said it was 50%, the prices have increased in Denmark, so now it's probably less. But we have assumed €50 per ton delivered at site. And on the pulp food waste, we have assumed €15 per ton. These are crucial assumptions. And of course, if something is very off from a reality that can be obtained later on, results would probably change. On transportation, we have assumed a certain hourly cost of a truck, and that then translates to a cost per ton of feedstock or per ton of digestate. Electricity for internal use, we have made assumptions on that, as well as for natural gas consumptions and personnel costs. On the product pricing, and this is where we probably have made the strongest assumptions, is On the biomethane to grid, or transportation for that matter, we have assumed 4.5 euro cents per kilowatt. When we compare this to a European context, we see pricing in the range of 5 to 7. So we don't consider it high from that perspective, but we recognize that it's high compared to what the natural gas price is. When we target electricity, we have chosen to assume 10 cents per kilowatt, which is aligned with the power to grid pricing. There's no revenue on digested, there's no revenue on CO2 at the outset. We've done calculations, what if scenarios on digested, on CO2, on a lot of others. Depreciation is over 10 years with an actual lifetime of 20 years. That's a very typical assumption, but of course, depreciation has a large impact in terms of cash flow and net revenue. There's a maintenance and reinvestment of about 2%, and inflation assumed of 4%. Interest rate twice that, 8%, and then twice that is the target on return on investments. And these are, again, very, very crucial assumptions, and especially on the last one. I mean, it's hard to do much about inflation. It's probably also hard to do something about the core interest rate per se, but maybe something can be done to reduce the risk, to you could say, reduce the demand for return. Let's see, what else? There's no subsidies included, and the financing structure in the outset is assumed 50-50 between equity and debt. This is the CapEx breakdown. So we end up with a situation where we envisage that that the farm scale facility would cost up to about 8.5 million. There's a EPC risk price premium in here, about I think 15% at the bottom there. There's also some contingency. So there is a chance that these numbers are high, but these are the numbers that we are comfortable with, that we see in other markets. For Model 2, it's a little bit higher, about 10 million. And for Model 3, we're pushing 18 million. A pulping facility itself would be just short of 10 million euro. On the OPEX side, the smallest facility is obviously the easiest to run, also has the lowest OPEX. There is very little, if any, feedstock cost, which is one of the reasons for the big difference between Model 1 and Model 2, especially on feedstock and transport. Both Model 2 and 3 have a cost associated with the feedstock. On the revenue side, we've run different scenarios. One is sending the biogas to thermal energy, to thermal power plants. Another is for electricity sales for Model 1. And with the assumption that we have made, anyhow, the electricity sales is by far the better option. For Model 2 and 3, we have made calculations for biomethane to grid or biomethane to transportation. The reason is the difference between these is actually all down to that transport gas is cheaper in Armenia than natural gas itself. So there's about a 20% difference in price. And that 20% we've applied to the price of biomethane. Obviously, then the transportation becomes less attractive. This is the numbers on a maybe too detailed level, but what I wanted to stress and why I wanted to have these numbers here is I wanted to stress the fact that while the payoff in this case is not viable given a 16% return per annum, the electricity production at these price levels actually do show a positive EBITDA. And to me, as an economist, that means that there is something to work with. It means that something can be done, something can be mitigated, something can be altered into a situation where it could make also financially commercial sense. However, of course, there is a gap in this case that needs to be worked with. The numbers that I have, yeah, so pardon, I'm just going to go over here. Numbers that I have here are different net present value calculations given different return requirements. Thank you very much. Doesn't that start to squeak? No? Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so different net present value calculations here. And the one here, 0, basically means the undiscounted return. So that is if time doesn't deteriorate the value of money, then that is your net present value. We've also done additions to those numbers in case you put a value to the digested. For this particular model, this one is blank. And that's because this model assumes that you use the biogas in an engine, and that makes it difficult to collect the CO2. If you do upgrading, that's a different story. But those numbers then added with the numbers in the beginning then ends up in this. And of course, if you have 12 or 16% demand on the return, it still doesn't live up to that. But including the digested actually puts you above the 8%, and that is the interest rate threshold. Model 2, the food waste based. Some of the same elements, but considerably stronger EBITDA, and a positive cash flow actually. So it's not positive enough again to live up to a 16% demand, but it is a little bit, you can say, stronger in the fundamentals than the first model. And in this case, we have, and of course there are assumptions on the value of the CO2 and assumptions on the value of the digested and so on that all inflict what these numbers specifically are. But I think very interestingly, if these assumptions hold, then on this one, you actually have net positive values all the way down. And the last model, the co-digestion based, it's a stronger one. The other two had return rates of about 6% in the base case scenario, which is this one. This one has almost 9, so it's a lot closer to breaking even on that, and it really stresses what we see as economies of scale. There is some value in operating these in larger scale. We've done a lot of different scenarios. We've done a lot of different tests and stresses and so on. We try to sum up. I'm sorry, there's something on the formatting here, but I hope it works. So what we've done here, if I focus just on model 1. Initially we have the NPV 16. So that's the NPV at 16% discount rate relative to the CapEx, the IRR. That's the blue one you have here. That's the base case. And on top of that, we've then tried to change a lot of different parameters. We've tried to change OPEX and CapEx and digested sales, include that, change the inflation, etc. We also included a grant, and that proved to be fairly important. You can assimilate grants also by changing interest rates and increasing the debt to equity ratio, and so on. But in this case, it's modeled as a grant. So what we would like to observe is, there's the NPV 0, which is at 0%, right? So, which is positive, which is more than half of the initial capex. It would require a price increase at the base case levels to about 14-15 cents per kilowatt to make it viable at 16% to break even. But also a small thing which the trained eye might notice is that while grant is the most impactful, capex changes are actually the second most impactful. This is a little unusual, but it has to do with the fact that in Model 1, the farm-based model, the OPEX is relatively low compared to the capex. What we normally see is higher operational expenditures, but has to do with the foundations of that particular setup, which is very farm-based, very close to the farmers and so on, so with little monetized costs around the feedstock. Model 2. Of course, in many places, the sort of same picture, but there are some important differences. In this case, it's possible to include the CO2 sales, which would make it completely viable. Also in the 16% discount situation. Grants are still important, but in this case, OPEX is much more important than CAPEX. Both important, but OPEX most. And then in the third one, well, obviously, coming back to it being a stronger case and so on, it's also more receptive. I mean, an OPEX reduction of 20% would actually put it on par with the demand requirement. Excuse me, I need some water. Yeah, let's go on. There we go. So, we've of course also dived into environmental impact assessment topics. We haven't done an environmental impact assessment. That's a whole different animal. But try to look at what is important to look at from a community perspective, what is important to look at from an environmental perspective. And of course, something like air quality is important, focusing on the potential. Thank you very much. Thank you. H2S, smell of rotten eggs. Ammonia, not too nice to smell either. But also dangerous, both of them in high concentrations. So that's something that has to be considered. Also NOx's and so on can be considered. There can be permitting elements that needs to be taken into account and so on. Odors, of course, it's sort of a soft one, but it's often an important one, especially for a local community. When you try to establish a biogas facility, and that be anywhere, you're going to have people being concerned about two things. One of them is smell. The other is transport. Sometimes you also have the visual impact of seeing biogas facilities, but otherwise those two, smell and transport, are the ones that that most people focus on. Noise, fairly easily handled, I would say. There's a lot that can be done. So same thing for odors and air quality. But again, it's something that needs to be handled in these. One that is very important but not very locally focused is the emissions itself. It's very important to stress that, and this is actually one of the core reasons why we want to target a more, you can say, central, industrialized, professional approach to biogas is what Alan also mentioned, is the potential impact of methane in the atmosphere. While used correctly, and the same goes for natural gas, remember that, because natural gas is mostly methane. Used correctly, it can offset a lot, but if not handled well, then you might have an issue on the emissions. So if the underlying knowledge is that methane is about 25 times more impactful as a GHG than CO2, then if you emit, let's say 4% of your production, then you have offset your entire reduction. So you want to keep the methane in the facilities. So that's very important. Another reason why we target upgrading if we can, because then every molecule counts and they are valuable. Yes. What we recommend is trying to establish a set of standards that we can use, because it's one of the things we found here when it comes to EIAs and Armenia, there's very little in place around biogas facilities. And the reason is obvious. You don't have them. So why would you? But if you want to have them, then there needs to be a set of regulations in place also on the environmental impact assessment, what a facility has to live up to, and what can be expected from that, and what can be expected from the communities. And we have this sort of discussions also ongoing in the Nordics. We do have regulations in place, but they are also adapted as we go along to fit both the communities, but also to fit the technological development. The social impacts. As I mentioned earlier, so there are, especially on the feedstock side, and it both goes for the fact that you have in the rural communities many small household farms. So if you want to, if we want to make a push into those areas and get that feedstock, it will definitely have an impact on their, you can say, way of life, on their modus operandi, how they do things on their everyday scale. If, for instance, the manure that they today maybe store, dry, and burn is now to be used in the AD, then how do we ensure that these people have something to replace that former fuel that they had? How do we ensure that enough value comes back to the local community for them to see this as an asset and not a liability? There's also some change of land use that must be taken into account. Oh, and I forget an important one on the first one. People today don't sort out their food waste in general. I know there are small projects and it might be on the way, but it's not there yet. So if we want to include the 60% of municipal solid waste that Alan described was or is likely food waste, then there is something that needs to be done. A habit or you can say an incentive scheme or so different ways of nudging, pushing, pulling in the right direction so that we can actually get access to that feedstock. And that will have some social impacts. On the risks, we've tried to identify various risks, things that can happen before, during, or in connection with the establishment of larger AD facilities. There is, in the development phase, some obvious ones that are there, not just in Armenia, but basically everywhere, fairly generic. Feedstock availability. We need to ensure, of course, that feedstock is there and will continue to be there, and so on. Permitting should be, or can be, I think, a little bit of a joker right now. And this is not particular for Armenia. I think this is particular for any place that is seeing permit applications from something or someone that they haven't dealt with before, really. There can be some community opposition, at least that's what we've seen in other places, not in my backyard discussions, funding gaps, and then fundamentally and very importantly, there needs to be a political will to do this. There are ways to mitigate these risks. A lot of it is about stakeholder engagement, ensuring that those that are affected are not done so, you can say, biased. We also recommend a lot of international cooperation, also in the development phase, because there are a lot of experiences from elsewhere that can be used and utilized. On the feedstock itself, there are some risks. There are some about availability around the year and possible decline in animals or businesses failing. I mean, fundamentally, that was what happened with the one and only larger scale facility that has been in Armenia. I've visited that facility, and frankly speaking, I don't think the biogas facility failed. I mean, if you stop having input to any production, then that production stops. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, my car is not driving right now because I'm not driving it. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's sort of the same thing. On the process, there are some process-related risks. I don't consider this a big issue. I think there's very little that we don't know, but the issue can arise if not the right people or the right knowledge is running the facilities. And I think that is basically the best way to mitigate anything in the process is to start out with someone that has long-term experience within this, maybe bring them in from abroad, and teach new people about what's going on. Of course, there are environmental and regulatory risks. You have to make sure that your facility, not just on paper, but also in reality, lives up to the requirements that are set in the permits that you have, and otherwise live up to the regulation that it has to. There is a little bit of a development risk here, in the sense that some of this is unclear of what to live up with. But we'll get to that hopefully also in the breakout sessions. Financials, very very generic really. Things can be more expensive than you thought it were, or you don't get the value that you thought out of your gas. This is something that is, I would say, fairly easily overcome. Yet, of course, we see, and this is in any business across the world, you see failures to hedge your risks properly. And of course, finally, political risks. There is some regulatory uncertainty that must be overcome, some access to infrastructure that we would like to address, and then the whole geopolitical instability in the region that might, not as a direct risk, be an issue, but it could be an issue in terms of funding, in terms of getting international financing to assist. So, to sum up, I think it's evident that there are some business cases to be found underneath all of these. We should target risk reductions to reduce the demand for return. We should target getting regulatory support, removal of obstacles to get on, because that in turn will reduce also the risk demand, the return demand. And of course, relevant feedstock. We need to find ways to incentivize correctly the use of feedstock in anaerobic digestion. And we need to put a value to the idea of producing biomethane, gas, electricity, CO2 domestically, made in Armenia, valued in Armenia. So, we've listed up most of what I've just been talking about. There are some lack of some provisions on the zoning and land use classifications, so very concrete. There's a little bit of the EIA requirement that we need to tap into what has to be submitted in order to get a license to operate. So we, I think I'll put this one down, step over here, hang on. So we propose to introduce some additional provisions so we can have these licensing processes. Maybe make standard operational terms for biogas facilities. Accelerating zoning and land use approvals. Perhaps a digital platform. And on the financial side as well, we don't see right now any specific programs for biogas sector infrastructure development. There is no feed-in tariffs, no grants, no nothing, as we see it. And I think especially given the sort of grasp Armenia is being held in by a fairly low natural gas price, that is one that needs to be addressed. There's grid connections that must be addressed as well, both in the gas grid but also in the power grid. It's not all about the cost of it, it's also about being allowed to access the grid. Yeah. Let's do this one. So we see no governmental program at the moment for the biogas sector in Armenia. If this is to be rolled out, we would envisage that is a requirement. Also there is, and this is maybe a little bit also on the technical side, there is a lack of clear mechanisms to integrate biogas into the energy system. Biogas is fundamentally, if you do power, it's fundamentally very different to solar and wind, because solar and wind, they are stochastic, they are correlated, and solar, well, that one only produces in the day. Biogas produces 24/7. So in that sense, it's a base load if you do electricity. It also has the opportunity to inject it to the grid, where you can store it and use it when you need it. So I think it's important that while we do agitate for governmental programs for the AD, we also need to address that it cannot just be a subsection of some laws that are already in place for wind and solar, because it wouldn't fit. On the agricultural side, on the feedstock side and the digester, we see some gaps that for some of them have to do with the lack of enforcement of existing regulation. And that is, I think, most evident in the rural areas of Armenia. And there is not really a manure management system in place. And there is a lack of guidance on the use of digestate as well. And that needs to be addressed. So what we propose is to have regulations on the feedstock use. We had to have collection and disposing into the correct places. So that underneath it means don't put your slaughterhouse waste roadside. At least one thing. And classifying fertilizer as such. That's the way we see it. And I know there are some regulational differences between our countries and so on, but across large parts of EU, when something has been in an AD, it can be used on farmland as it is. No further treatment needed. We propose to utilize some of the standard EU regulation on the nitrate disposal on farmland as well, to ensure that also in the case of anaerobic digestion, that nutrients are not over managed or over disposed of in particular areas. So I think if we are to sort of sum up future policies and make a roadmap for that, there is a lot about raising awareness, raising knowledge locally, but also politically and in the right places about the benefits and the needs for biogas itself and for the handling of waste in, you can say, modern ways. We would propose to, as I already mentioned, a few examples of, to reform these governmental regulations and trying to cover these gaps that we see in the biogas sector or the lack of the biogas sector. Maybe consider having tip fees that you actually pay to get rid of. You get a service, which is the waste handling, and that has a value. And then tapping into, as also mentioned from the very onset, the CO2 market, trading frameworks and so on. Also, the natural gas itself, using that not necessarily locally all the time, but at times perhaps also exporting. We need to have some financial support mechanisms in place, at least from day one. I hope that we can phase them out over some years. But they could be low interest loans, it could be grants, it could be tax reductions, etc. And then basically strengthening international cooperation to attract foreign investment. Finally, we would enhance public-private partnership and promote community engagement. And I'll come back to that because I have a few slides, and so bear with me, these are the last two. If it is to be implemented, or when this is to be implemented, we propose to do this in a phased approach. So that we start out with the few examples that there are, and they are there, where we could actually go out almost tomorrow and start erecting facilities. We will propose a few examples of these that are actually based on the models also. Probably one based on a large cattle production, probably one based on chicken and egg production. So those two would be examples of farm-scale facilities, but based on larger suppliers. One, which is primarily food waste, near Yerevan. And one with an abundance of farmers who can supply jointly. And those four examples are all there right now and could be pushed, pulled, incentivized, etc. And we would consider this as sort of a path-making initiative that sort of shows the way, but obviously also in the process will come across different hurdles that they will need to cross. And those hurdles basically provide learnings, provide additional knowledge on where does the shoe not fit perfectly, or where do we have to either adjust or reformulate existing, for instance, legislation and so on. We would envisage, if this was to happen tomorrow, we would need to have feed-in tariffs. There would need to be grants. There would need to be support mechanisms. Some of them can probably be international. EU has possibilities. Denmark has possibilities. I'm sure other countries have possibilities as well of supporting such a development. and by the very least to provide some sort of guarantees for the investor, etc., that would bring down the risk of the project. And the bottom one, actually very important. These, especially these first ones, from our perspective, would need some sort of degree of local stakeholder on the equity side. Someone in Armenia needs to at least co-own, if not own, the facility. I think it's difficult to envisage someone that comes in from abroad with the idea and just doing it all. And one thing you can be sure of is that should that ever happen, it wouldn't be on Armenian terms. So for a variety of reasons, I think a local equity stakeholder, private and or public. And the reason I mention public is especially on a food waste Yerevan side, I could envisage a public co-owner or owner. As a phase two, we would propose to roll out, utilizing the learnings from phase one in expanding those facilities. Some of them have a potential of doing more and becoming the core cluster facility. But we would envisage maybe 4 to 6 new clusters. It would still have a need to be supported in some degree, but hopefully less than the first ones. That's the fundamental idea. Also because you would, over time, hopefully have more and more tapping into European markets on the gas side, on the CO2 side. So that would bring in extra revenue. And then finally, a phase three where you roll out as much as possible. This would probably be in 10 years from day one, with more value chains in place, with more examples of this is done, this is how it's done in Armenia. The need for support would be less, although I would still expect some sort of support to be needed also 10 years from now. And I think with that, we have the Q&A session.
Thank you, Morten. Thank you, Morten, very much for insightful and thought-provoking presentation. So, dear audience, the floor is open for questions. I'm sure you have prepared many interesting and probably also challenging questions. Just a small item. So we have volunteers. If you have a question, just raise your hand and the volunteers will come to you and then you can ask your question. Thank you. So, yeah, who wants to start us off?
Շնորհակալություն շատ հետաքրքիր ներկայացման համար, հարցս մի քիչ դժվար կլինի երևի հստակ արձագանքել, բայց հնարավորինս կփորձեմ արձագանքել։ Ամենասկզբում նշեցիք այն բիոգազի արտադրամասերը, որոնք որոշ փոքր չափերով, բայց կային Հայաստանում, հա, մի քանիսը։ Այս մեծ ուսումնասիրությունը մեզ ցույց տվեց, որ կա այդ պոտենցիալը Հայաստանում եւ կարելի է գնալ այդ ուղղությամբ։ Հարցս հետեւյալն էր. Ունեք որևէ ուսումնասիրություն, ինչու արդեն իսկ գոյություն ունեցող արտադրամասերը չաշխատեցին, որոնք էին հիմնական խնդիրները։ Երևի այսքանը։
All right, thank you for that question. So, while Alan on his slide showed that there were roughly 10 examples of anaerobic digesters, I would say only one I would qualify as something that resembles what we have proposed. And that would be the Lusakert facility, and that one clearly failed because the feedstock disappeared. So I mean, from an operational perspective, when the feedstock was there, it was up and running. And as for the other ones, I saw 5 to 100 cubic meters digesters. It is not. I mean, there can be 1,000 ways why they didn't work. I'm sorry, I don't know those smaller ones.
Can I just add a little bit on this?
Yes, of course.
Morten, I'm very sorry. Because we're talking, it's very important, and thank you for pointing that out, because we're talking about very different scale of digesters. I mean, 5 to 100 cubic meters is just a household device, let's call it. And we're talking here about, you know, very big scale, utility scale facilities, and Lusakert Biogas was one of the, maybe the smallest kind of example still. And yes, obviously Lusakert Biogas has a feedstock issue. And yes, as Morten mentioned, that the other ones, these household devices, they just relied on goodwill of, you know, surrounding household farmers, let's say, that just at some point they decided not to bring their manure, or something went wrong, or yeah. I think we can just dismiss those small, I mean, you know, devices, let's not call them even plants, when we consider national scale, you know, infrastructural change. Yeah. Thank you. Հարցեր կան, ուրիշ? Questions? Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Is it? Okay. I live in a village. There is a large dairy farm not far from my home. It's surrounded by houses. And I'm struck, what I witness every year are the number of burnings of manure as well as trash. And of course the odor, but also the negative, very harmful consequences for health. And I'm wondering, given the range of the systemic change in which you're engaged, if you have been communicating with the health sector to become a partner in this very urgent and needed area.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Personally, I don't think we've been in contact with the health sector, but I think it's a valuable addition to the group of entities that could have valuable input for also the EIA sessions and also the monitoring of these facilities. Because the burning of the waste, the storage of probably also animal waste in big open lagoons and so on does definitely have a negative impact on local communities. And some of it we can avoid altogether, and some of it we can, or AD can help mitigate. I will not argue that digested out of a biogas facility has absolutely no smell to it. I will argue, however, that it has a considerable less smell, and it is, you can say, gone quicker when disposed on farmland. Quite a few studies have proven this. But the burnings of the feedstock, I'm guessing it's solid parts of animal manure, maybe straw, is definitely something that inclusion of the AD would suppress or reduce. Thank you.
I'm very sorry to jump in.
No, it's okay, Harold.
But this is a very important point. I would like to add to this health aspects also the slaughterhouse waste, because it is buried right now, and we have a lot of, you know, risks associated with infections and everything when it is buried. Thank you for that point. Very important. And,
I have.
Alan has a question, and then a question there from a student, and then here.
Morten, Alan here in the front.
There you go.
A question that has come up, and I heard it from around, are we not going to have the same feedstock problem with these new plants? So what are the incentives? How is this different from previous attempts? How could this be set up differently?
Well, I would argue that the Lusaker, the fact that that one is not running, now I don't know how they ran their business or whatever, so I won't even get into that, but my point is that that is something that can happen anywhere. You have a factory and the whole thing goes bankrupt. That has nothing to do with the biogas facility. So frankly, I think that is, you know, the way to mitigate that type of risk is to have several suppliers to the facilities. And for instance, in the Yerevan site that we propose, there might only be one supplier, the city of Yerevan. So I would argue that if that one goes bankrupt, then also the biogas facility does.
Yeah, but let's take you know, the small collective farms that are working
but there
together.
You have the risk mitigated by the fact that you have many suppliers. That is I think the best mitigation of that.
And why are they supplying? What is their economic interest?
So their economic interest would lie in the rural development that we get, the work that we get there, the value. I mean, potentially the feedstock could be valued, but those are, I would say, that those are some of the questions that we would like to debate. It also, how do we engage the local communities? How do we ensure to get value back to them? How do we ensure that biogas installations do not step too much on their toes, so to speak? Because it is tapping into existing value chains. And you can argue that, for instance, with the burning of the feedstocks on the field that would hopefully be avoided, that would be monetized simply by putting a price on what it is they're burning. That could be a valuable input to the facility.
And the manure?
The manure could...
The cost of collecting it and bringing it, and what is the interest of that individual?
Yeah, so the cost of collecting it is already internalized in the business case as a cost for the biogas facility. So that part of it would come at, you can say, no cost to the value that we've seen elsewhere is two things. And whether that's relevant or not is very case specific, is the digested can be moved to a different location for free. So that's a very concrete value for most
so they
farmers.
get good quality free fertilizer.
Yep. Secondly, the value, as you say, or the higher quality of the digested than normal slurry could be a value. That if it's monetized explicitly, that's also possible, of course, but will just drive up the need for a higher value on the backside of the facility.
Thank you very much, Morten. I think there was a question over there.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan, for the question, for the excellent pitch. So my question is that I know that Yerevan has a very thick density of population, and as you mentioned, the odor of the plant will be like very bad, like I would say. And how will you manage to make this nice for population, and maybe you plan to make these plants in other areas of next to Yerevan, for example, like Nubarashen or I don't know, Masis, which is more closer to Yerevan. And also I'm interested how many square meters of space we need for each plant to have proper like sizes. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, let me start with the last one first. That's very concrete. And so a typical site, I mean, they come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, typically we're around 2 to 5 hectares. I've seen them as small as 1.5 For a fairly large facility, I've seen them 20 hectares for, but in that range. And if I understood your other questions was how, it was a little bit along the same lines as Alan's really, how do these facilities, how could they be rolled out into broader Armenia? And I think the answer to that relies a little on what sort of community engagement we can manage to get. If we indeed can be successful in getting a more of a broad involvement in these, then I think locating them specifically in any place should be done with engaging in talks and dialogue with these local municipalities or villages. I'm not sure if I comprehended your question or answered it, but yeah, all right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. One more question.
Thank you very much. My name is Karl Hofster. I'm Dutch, happily living in Armenia, 20 years. So when you were presenting Denmark and the number of poultry, I quickly looked at the Dutch numbers. It's even worse. So my question is there a case, or have you looked at it at a case that looks only at processing straw? Because to me it seems that is fairly local, clustered in Armenia, the production of it, and then the collection possibly could be clustered. It seems to have a high calorific value, and it seems like a
it's interesting. So I wanted to. Let me put it that way. It was actually one of the entrances that we had in the early discussions was the potential of straw, and it is there for sure. We have not done a specific model on straw itself for a variety of reasons. That's not ruling out the possibility that there is a case. We are involved there is a lot around both in the Nordics and elsewhere. There is more and more focus on lignocellulosic feedstock as an abundant feedstock with a high yield potential, and there is a lot of both sciences and pilot trials, etc., being run in those directions. And while it is certainly possible, and there is a fairly large biomethane potential, I would argue that even in an Armenian context where probably we can keep capex down, something like that would have to be very large scale. It would have a very high capex compared to the other ones. And since those have been sort of targets where we have tried to keep under certain thresholds or keep them as low as possible, that's one reason. The other one is if that straw is then utilized, let's say more or less in one bigger processing, it's not available to support the others. So that's another reason. But there could be a case. I agree. You could probably make one with 50 million-ish of million cubes of methane. And I won't rule it out. But I think from a generic perspective and solving some of the other issues, it's important to co-digest them to some extent at least. Maybe a mix of food waste and straw is another opportunity. Also because if you do it straw only, you need to put in a lot of water, and then you either need to separate it on the back, which is possible to some extent, and then refeed water. So it's not without issues doing it, but there could potentially be a case. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Morten. Let's take the final two questions from the audience. We have one there. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sona, one of the owners of Lusaket, present Lusaket biogas plant. Thank you, Morten, for this, for representing us the successful practice of Danish way of making biogas. Previously we had had a practice working with the Danish partners, but they left disappointed. To be fair, I want to to give inside information that before having problems with feedstock, we had problems with Armenian government while importing the most important like techniques for our operations, and that's why we stopped our works. And now, after hearing all this information, what do you think? What is the most essential and most important thing to implement biogas in Armenia, to make a successful biogas practice in Armenia? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the fundamental thing is one of the last points on some of the not very last slides, but a little bit before. I think Armenia has a choice to make, really. Do you want to have more independence in your security and in your energy supply? Do you want to have more security of supply? How much value do we put on that? The same goes for food production. The same goes for chemical fertilizers. How much do we value independence? Even if it's only 5, 10, 15, 20%. What's the value of that? If nothing is done, if no value is put on that, then it's difficult, I think. So I think values has to be put on some of those things that are not valued today. That I think is more or less the only way forward.
Thanks a lot. The last question from the audience, and then the final question from the online audience, and then the lunch break. Thanks.
Thank you. So in many villages, communities and farms, people rely on manure and food waste as natural fertilizers. How does participating in this biogas program comparing in terms of benefits, how do they benefit? Do they benefit more from giving these fertilizers or waste to your program as energy source, or they benefit in more using it as a fertilizer for themselves?
Thank you. I think it's a very relevant question, and I think it has to be addressed specifically in each of those, and it's each of those facilities or each of those projects, because feedstock for a biogas facility will typically, except in the case of straw or silage or something like that, have to be fresh. It has to be, if you leave something unattended for a while, it loses its gas potential, so to speak. It starts to degrade by itself. So naturally, utilizing them in biogas needs to step in early on. And then in terms of the communities, what they get from that really depends on how they normally interact with this waste. If their value is normally that they, as you say, get a fertilizer for their land, then they would still get a fertilizer for their land, and they would even get one with more plant accessible nutrients in it. So that would be a value. It would maybe, depending on, I mean, I've not been everywhere in Armenia, I've not seen every practice and so on. So, but where I have been, I have also seen quite a loss of resources, a little bit, I think a lack of enforcing anti-pollution and so on. And that is something that the ADs can help with, because the product they come with is pollutant-free, in the sense that larger plastic elements and so on are all gone. They are taken out before the process, are never introduced. So I think definitely there is some value to be given back to community. But whether it steps on some toes in terms of the local value chains already in place is something that needs to be addressed in each and every case.
Thank you, Morten. And then the final question from the online audience. It says, given Armenia's decentralized waste generation and limited rural infrastructure, do you think centralized high capex models are adaptable in Armenia? As segregation of huge waste is also one of the challenges. Also, they will fail in future for the need of feedstock in case of no proper transport and segregation.
I do not propose building a many 100,000 tons facility in the middle of, sorry, but nowhere. That's not the proposal here. So the idea is to start out with those that are central, near the feedstock, near the big city, near the big producers of animal wastes, and then basically spread from there. Because underlying the question is also, should we just do as you've done in Denmark? Certainly not. And please, this is not what we've done up north at all. But it's also a whole different set of feedstocks. So no, I don't think building decentrally large scale in each and every community is the right call at all. Yeah, but thank you.